In today's video, I'm going to show you how I took this song from sounding like this.
Watch out, I'll be lurking. Know about every move that you've been making.
To sounding like this.
Watch out, I'll be lurking. Know about every move that you've been making. You don't really want to.
The song is called Venom by Rhea Raj, and I'm going to break down exactly what I did on the drums, the vocals, and the final master to bring it all together. Also, I'll show you some of the ways Rhea used doubles and harmonies to bring more impact to specific parts of the song. Before we do get started, if you're looking to take some of your songs from demos to final masters, make sure to hit me up on mixandmastermysong.com. Let's dive in. All right, so first we're going to start with the drums. I always start with drums and bass first when I'm mixing. I always find that if you can get that to sound good, it's such a great way to build a foundation for the rest of the mix. And so much music is based on, the head nod of your drums and your bass. So I always feel if that sounds good, then everything else will be a lot easier moving forward. So I'm going to play you these drums just without any processing. Well, there is processing from the master, but we'll get to that later. But just without anything on it, and then we'll break down how I got to the destination I wanted to. So as you can hear, they're programmed drums and they sound pretty good already. So the first thing I always want to make sure with when you have something like this is I don't want to change the feel of the drum relation. I want it to still feel the way it was intended to feel in the production. So you got to be careful not to completely EQ things differently or whatnot. So with this, it was rather simple. Now, before we get into it, let me show you how I route things. I always route my kick and snares to my drum bus. And then I have a high percussion bus that I route all other things, hi-hats, shakers, percussion. And in this case, I put my snap and my snare 2 there as well because it wasn't the dominant snare. And I want just the dominant snare and the dominant kick to go to my drum bus. Now, the only plugin I put directly on the kick or snare was this Cuco compressor. This is a compressor I haven't used in a while. I mixed the song a couple years ago, but it is really good at giving different flavors, as you can see here, and the tightness and contour. And there's actually a review I did of this video. I'll put the link up here if you want to hear more about it. But check out what this does. It just changes the tone in a good way and brings the kick a little bit more forward. This is bypassed. See how it just gives a little more of that mid-range punch to the kick, and it really just makes it pop out of the speakers a bit more. So that really helped bring that on. Next was I wanted to give these drums a little more excitement. They just sounded a little too electronic. I wanted to have some saturation to not only bring energy, but also some thickness. So we started off with Saturn 2. And that's the beginning of bringing a little more roundness to this, followed by the VMR. And this is a little bit of a wild preset. This was something I was working on at the time, and it actually sounds really cool, but it's running 2 virtual mix buses into a little bit of New York saturation. Take a listen before and after this now. So you can hear it's bringing a bit more of that mid-range energy, plus giving it a little bit of compression just from the saturation. Then went to the Sneve pre. I love the sound of Neves just to make things sound a little bit rounder. And then follow that up with the black box. Once again, more saturation. And true iron. So we're adding a lot of subtle saturations to this kick and snare. And for me, this is something I do sometimes to give some of the warmth that analog used to give us, but in the digital domain. And I found sometimes you need to stack a few plugins in order to get to that same space, but this is how I did it on this mix. So let's hear this without any of these, and then I'll bring them all in so you can hear the difference. Now moving on to the high percussion. This was somewhat left alone, except here, you can see these hi-hats, right? They were kind of stagnant. And what I do, and I got this from my guy, Jason Joshua, is you put these two PS22s together, and it just gives some movement and width to the hi-hat. So you notice the hi-hats sound wider now, they sound more exciting, and also they're also going to get a bit out of the way of your vocal once you bring that in. And the only other thing that's happening on these high percussions is this pan, which is just basically panning the shaker to the right a bit. I always want to make sure I'm getting my hi-hats and shakers out of the way of the vocal as much as possible because they can be in the same frequency range as your vocal. Now lastly, you'll notice this kick was side-chained. This is side-chained to the bass, and I use this plugin called Laser to sidechain the bass, and what it does is it will duck the kick out of the way just in the frequency of the kick in order for the kick to still punch through the bass. And this can help in a couple of ways. A, you'll hear your kick a lot stronger, and B, sometimes if there are some phase issues between the two, ducking that out will clear the way for the kick to punch through. Let me play you the bass and the drums together, and then I'll turn this laser on and off. You'll notice when that kick happens on that turnaround, the kick is so much stronger with the lasers ducking those frequencies out and letting it breathe and come through. Let's move on to what we did on the vocals. All right, so here is the vocal. I'm gonna solo the leads for you and just play it without anything on it at all.
No way, but you're too good to show it. Your ego is shameless, but you better learn how to tame it. Do you?
So as you can hear, Rhea records with autotune. It's the sound she wants, even though she's such a good singer, she could record without it, but it's printed on there. So that was the only thing that came in. Now, what I first noticed with this vocal was I could hear the room in it a bit. And the plugin I like to use to clean that up is, well, there's a couple of them, but in this case, I used the Deverb Plus by Plugin Alliance SPL. And I'll just play this with or without it. You'll hear how well that cleans it up. So we're just reducing some of the reverb of the room.
No way, but you're too good to show it. Your ego is shameless.
And you can hear it just tighten up that room a bit. Then after that, I get a little bit of a RVox. This is just a beginning stage of compression, just to tighten up the vocal on its own.
No way, but you're too good to show it.
And I'm also using a little bit of the gate just to get it out of the way if there's any sort of sounds that I don't want in between vocals. And then lastly, on the individual track is a de-esser. Once again, cleaning up some of the stuff before we go into my main vocal bus.
No way, but you're too good to show it.
De-essing early on can help later on when you're adding a lot more compression. The S's won't come through quite as much. So that is the vocal. And then you notice there's two lead vocals. They're going back and forth here. So I treated both of those the same exact way. And then they are going to this lead vocal bus where most of the heavy duty processing is happening. So the first plugin on this is the Weiss Audio EQ MP. And this is cutting out some of the low end rumble that most of all of us always do. And then there was still a bit of mid-range buildup in this vocal that I didn't like. This is at about 230 Hertz. So we ducked that down a couple of dB.
No way, but you're too good to show it. Your ego is shameless.
Next was using this Pulsar 1178, which I don't use all the time, but I think I just gotten it along with the Tico compressor, and it had this cool tape feature to it that added some warmth I felt the vocal needed, and so we added this next.
No way, but you're too good to show it. Your ego.
And then next was the Tico, and this has this cool contour with the Con Air, which is pretty good for vocals.
No way, but you're too good to show it.
So you'll notice a concept here. light compression on all of these, even starting off with the RVox, but we're stacking compressors on compressors. And then a lot of my heavy lifting ends up happening right here on this Pro Amp B. And this is split up into 4 bands. And the reason being is this can act as almost like an EQ. And a lot of times what's happening is the low end in this muddy area is what I don't want. But if you just EQ it down, you'll lose some of the warmth of the vocals. So what I can do by splitting this compression into different bands is I can just have it when it's overwhelming too much low mud, it will pull it down. And the same way with the mid-range. These are the 2 bands I usually work with the most. The mid-range, when I pulls down a bit, if you have a harsh vocal, it will just pull down when it needs to, but also keep that brightness and crispness that you might want. So here it is with the Pro Amp B.
No way, but you're too good to show it. Your ego is shameless, but you better learn how to tame it. Do you
Next, you can see we're constantly cutting this 200 area, and then a bit of 500, and then here, this looks like a dynamic EQ, where we're bringing down just a little bit more of that 2000, 3000K area, which can sound kind of harsh sometimes.
No way, but you're too good to show it. Your ego is shameless, but you better learn how to tame it. Do you?
And then next, Soothe 2, getting rid of some of the high-end stuff that we're not liking.
No way, but you're too good to show it. Your ego.
So you can tell with these plugins, we've not only brought the dynamics up so the vocal's more in our face, but we've also carved out a lot of frequencies that we weren't liking to make the vocal sound better, right? Because we've done that, we've slightly dulled the vocal a bit too. So for me, and a lot of people hate on this, the CLA can always just make this work. And so I leave it pretty much the way it is on these first 3, then turn off these. And then sometimes I'll add the width, which I did on here. And other times I'll use the slap and have it like down here, but I didn't need it on this vocal. But here's before and after with the CLA.
No way, but you're too good to show it. Your ego is shameless, but you better learn how to tame it. Do you?
So now we're sounding better, yet there still wasn't enough brightness and crispness to this vocal, especially once I had the music on. So now I added an Avalon 737, boosting a little bit of high end here and actually a little bit of low end. This probably would have happened later on in the mix that I felt like maybe by cutting so much of that lows over here, we lost a little bit much. And instead of me going back and undoing it, I just boosted a bit more there. Also have a slight bit of compression on here as well.
No way, but you're too good to show it. Your ego is shameless, but you better learn how to tame it. Do you?
Because of boosting some of the high frequencies from the CLA and the Avalon, we brought up some more de-essers, some more Essers, so de-ess the whole thing. So let's hear this vocal without anything and then with it so you guys can hear the difference.
No way, but you're too good to show it. Your ego is shameless, but you better learn how to tame it. Do you?
Pretty huge difference. Then effects-wise, we have a room.
No way, but you're too good to show it.
Just giving us some dimension. Then a micro, which is a micro pitch from Sound Toys.
No way, but you're too good to show it. Your ego is shameless, but you better learn how to tame it. Do you really want to see the other side of me?
And then that is called NC. It is something I've made that I won't show you guys because it's mine. But it's basically just 3 or 4 Valhallas stacked in a certain way with a few things in between it. But that's basically the whole vocal right there. Now, one thing I want to show you guys before we get on the master bus is some cool things Rhea did. And I think this is helpful, especially if you're just starting to learn to record at home, is to see how detailed some of these songs that are recorded well are done. There's so many things happening in this vocal, and just in this part in particular. And take a listen to some of the different tones in here. She's got a high note, and then some other high notes. So you can hear all those different notes together were just for this one section. And it just brings an emotion and a key that, hey, we're changing to this next part. That's really special. And that's some of the cool things that can make a song sound great, is by doing all these different stacks in different places to change the emotion and the feel of the song. All right, so now for the final mix bus and mastering section of this. As you can see on my mixes, I mix and master a lot of the songs I work on. So I split it up on 2 different tracks just so my brain can split the concepts up. It's just how I've worked over the years. So the mix bus is here, and then the limiter is usually where most of the mastering stuff's happening. So the first plugin I have on is called the Unisum Mastering Compressor by Tone Projects. This thing is awesome. It can be clean, it can get a little dirty, you can do all kinds of things with it. It's super transparent when you need it to be, and that's why I love it. This GR limit, which is at 1.5 dB, and what that means is this thing will not compress more than 1.5 dB, and that's huge in the final mix bus, because you don't want to compress too hard on your final mix, or otherwise it just starts sounding small or pumpy or not good. And so that's one reason I really dig it. So let me play it without it and then turn it on. So as you can tell, it did get a little softer, so it might not sound like it got better, but it's pulling the mix together a bit more, and I like what it's doing. Next is this Gullfoss plugin. This always adds a little sauce to my mix and just cleans it up a bit more. So let me bypass this, and it's not much. I always put a little bit 13 and 12, and then I have the bias at -15. And you can hear it just slightly cleans the whole thing up. Next, I have this Amec EQ, which honestly I haven't used in a long time. But what I'm doing is I'm boosting some high end, a bunch of 26K, a little bit of 8K, and I think we're reducing a touch of 120 here. And that makes sense because maybe I felt like there's just a little too much low end when I finally got to the end of the mix. So this is without it and with it. So you can tell it's definitely giving us some nice sparkle to the final mix. And then this EQ, and I can guarantee you, I put this on the last 20 minutes of the mix, and I probably just felt this little notch here. I'll scan through this, and I probably found this little notch here was just poking out too much, and so we got rid of a little bit of it. All right, so next is some analog color, and I'm using the Better Maker limiter on this. And what this is doing is a very small amount of clipping and then a little bit of color. And for some reason, the bypass on my limiter isn't working today, but I'm gonna play it and then I'll just undo the IO, which will be a click, but you guys can at least hear the difference. So what we're getting is a bit of level out of that, and then a little bit of harmonics from the side and even, and I really love what that does. And then lastly, we just have 2 limiters. Well, a clipper and a limiter. This is the Massey Golden Master. And this is actually a plugin I used before I started using Gold Clip, before that came out. And so it's just clipping a little bit more before our final limiter. And then finally, we have our final limiter, which is doing most of the final loudness. All right, so that's it for this video on From Demo to Master. Let me know if you guys found this video helpful. I might start making a series, and it'd be cool to do other songs in different genres. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And as usual, if you need your songs mixed or mastered, hit me up at mixandmastermysong.com. Talk to you soon.